disappearing into the realm of the very small until they disappear from our ability to detect them, because the smaller they get, the bigger the apparatus you need to find them, and the ultimate limit is not set by nature herself, but rather by the willingness of the US Congress to go on funding ever larger accelerators. So at least from the small to the large, I would see that indeed as the structure of the universe, in this sense that at every level there's a wholeness which contains parts, which are themselves wholes, which contain parts, is, I would say, the very basis of the holistic worldview and the view of nature, which is the background to all my own scientific thinkings.
Why is the grass green? Why does the moon have phases? Why is the sky blue?
Oh, yes.
Children's questions. Are your children asking you the same questions you asked your father?
Well, I can't remember what I asked my father, but I imagine they must be the same kind of questions. I mean, these are very fundamental questions. And my children are very fascinated by death, for example. They ask about what happens when you die. Why do things die? They're very interested by stories of witches and giants that eat up children. They're very concerned with the whole question of being eaten and eating and killing and dying. These preoccupy them tremendously. All the stories they like have to involve elements of wicked witches or wicked giants.
Why is that?
Who eat little children. I don't know. I think children, the whole question of eating and the nature of eating and the nature of death and destruction and killing fascinates them, partly because we don't eat meat, you see, so they think about animals and killing animals, and why do people kill animals, and why do animals kill other animals?
What do you say in reply?
Well, I explain that in nature things have to eat something, and animals either eat other animals or they eat plants, and even if you eat plants, you kill them, but there's all this eating and killing going on as part of the structure of nature. But if you look at the fairy tales that young children read, Grimm's fairy tales, for example, it's amazing how many of them involve stories of killing, eating, or life-threatening situations of various kinds. And then it became clear to me why young children may be so obsessed with this, because I don't know about Holland, but in England, a very common phrase, we have you saw a two-year-old, our two-year-old. Very often, adults will come and they'll pick him up and they say, "You're so gorgeous, I could eat you up." Now, what must a two-year-old child think when an adult picks him up and smiles and says, "You're so gorgeous, I could eat you up"? Especially when he hears stories about wicked witches and giants that eat little children every day. I mean, it must be very confusing, and I don't know why adults say it, but this is a big issue for young children.
Certainly. We want to talk about Sheldrake's controversial ideas and seemingly bizarre experiments, but the circumventory movements continue. The view behind Sheldrake's back is beautiful, a beautiful murder machine. People who seek comfort in nature have no idea what goes on there, wrote Stephen Jay Gould, Sheldrake's later table companion. Nature is one big, violent, amoral contraption, cruel, wasteful, and indifferent to suffering. I put these words of Gould's to Sheldrake, not knowing there is such a polite but sharp collision in store. Evolution serves no purpose. It leads to change, not necessarily to improvement. Of that blind evolutionary process, man is the glorious and bizarre, probably unintentional, byproduct. The idea that man is the elevated end product of evolution is a perversity.
I think there's an urge to reproduce and survive inherent in organisms. It's obvious, it's a basic truth of life. And I suppose the real question is there more to life than that? I mean, I think the problem with usual theories of purpose in evolution is that most people who think there's a purpose in evolution think that the purpose is to produce modern scientists or modern Europeans or something like that. And I personally find it hard to believe that the purpose of the entire cosmos culminates in President Bush or something like that. I just don't find it a very plausible theory. So ones that are too human-centered seem to me inadequate theories of the purpose of evolution. So the trouble is that on the one hand, theories of cosmic purpose usually end up with what seems to me a rather banal sense of that purpose, namely the appearance of human beings on one small planet in a vast cosmos. And so I find a problem in saying, well, if there is a purpose, well, what is it? Perhaps the purpose is greater complexity, consciousness, self-consciousness. I mean, one could give answers like that. The strength of the Darwinian view seems to me that it emphasizes the importance of diversity. And it's very difficult to see, if you have a purposive view of evolution, why it should require so much diversity, unless diversity is in itself a purpose.
Yes.
You see, if we think the purpose of evolution is the evolution of human consciousness or the evolution of self-reflective intelligence or something like that, then why do we need 5 million species of beetles and butterflies in the Amazon alone? I mean, what is the purpose of this incredible diversity of life that we find here on Earth? Not just now, but in the past.
Darwin wrote once in a letter, what a book a devil's chaplain might write on the clumsy, wasteful, blundering, low, and horribly cruel works of nature. Talking about purpose.
Yes, well, Darwin was very keen to expel purpose from nature because he became increasingly atheistic and he wanted to keep God out of it. So he had a hidden agenda, which was the expulsion of God from nature. He started by reacting against the theology of Paley, the blind watchmaker, well, the watchmaker god of Paley, that Richard Dawkins has described as the blind watchmaker. He was reacting against a theological view that treated animals and plants as machines made by an engineering god. This image of God as a kind of mechanical engineer was what Darwin rejected. And in rejecting this image of God, he wanted to reject purpose from nature and any sense of sudden jumps or any surprising creativity in nature. Well, he didn't know any better than anyone else does about what's really going on, but he had a hidden theological motive for saying what he did. And I think that we can see in the world what we want to see. One of the features of the universe is that it's reflexive. If we think everything in the universe is organized in polarities, we see polarity wherever we look. If we think it's all organized in threes, we see patterns of threes and trinities wherever we look, or fours. And if we want to see destruction, waste, and cruelty everywhere we look, we can see it in the human world and in the biological world. If we want to see cooperation, symbiosis, and mutual help, then again we can see it wherever we look, in the human realm and in the natural realm as well. And I think that Darwin particularly emphasized the destructive aspects of nature, partly because of personal psychological motives, and partly because he made destruction the primary creative power.
How deep-rooted is this myth of striving upwards evolution leading towards man and consciousness? Because if I talk to people and I say, what is Darwinism all about? They say, survival of the best. Finally, human beings are the best, on top of the ladder. How deep-rooted is this myth of straitjacket, linear progress?
Oh, I think it's terribly deep-rooted, because I think the evolutionary idea in biology started from the evolutionary idea in human affairs. The idea of human progress came first, then it was generalized to biology, and then now to the cosmos. But the idea of human progress, which was part of the ideology of the late 18th century, the Enlightenment, the rationalists, was the idea that through the reason, particularly through scientific reason, modern man has risen above the superstitions of the Middle Ages, the Catholic religion, or indeed any religion, and that in turn has risen above the primitive, ignorant superstition of animistic tribes and societies, barbaric savages. And so this idea of human progress culminating in the 18th century